LSU is all in, even more than they were before. Matt Moscona of Locked On LSU is here to discuss what's going on down in Baton Rouge, and that's that there's more investment coming towards the NIL department for the Tigers and Brian Kelly. Matt, before we start to get to the ramifications of it, kind of just give everybody a snapshot of what exactly it means when they see a headline that LSU is raising, more money than they were before through their collective.
Yeah, I think there's a real possibility that LSU will have the most expensive roster in college football this year. If not the most, it'll be somewhere in the top 3 to 5. I can conservatively say that. And it's so interesting, Spencer, because Louisiana is not a rich state, and LSU doesn't have this Rolodex of billionaire boosters. But it's this domino of interesting things that happened. I do know this. In 2024, LSU's roster, they spent $5.4 million of NIL. That floors people when they hear it because they can't believe how low that number is. But that's a fact.
I tell you what, it floors me a little bit to hear how low that is. I would have thought it was at least 10.
No, 5.4. And a couple of things happened. Obviously, the LSU went 8-4. The collective did a deal with the Tiger Athletic Foundation, which is LSU's fundraising arm, whereby TAF took over fundraising, and subsequently every month, because donors could get priority points and a write-off, they raised over $1 million per month each month since that deal. And then all the Bryce Underwood hoopla, if you remember, LSU had but $1.5 million per year earmarked for Bryce Underwood. They also had north of $1 million earmarked for Jakeem Stewart, who ended up at Southern Cal. They had right at about $800K to $1 million earmarked for Cade Phillips, who flipped to Texas. So they were fundraising great relative to what they had been doing. They were flush with cash. All of a sudden, all these guys who they had money earmarked go elsewhere. So now they have more money to dump into the transfer portal. And then you had a whole bunch of pissed off rich people when Bryce Underwood flipped, because he had been committed for a year, and everyone's like, okay, what do we have to do? It was kind of ironic that the thing that went very badly is the thing that might actually be the thing that inspired LSU's people in action to go do well. So they're flush with cash, and they dumped it into this transfer portal class. It's really that simple. There's a big question of, can they sustain that? I don't believe it's sustainable. But for now, LSU flush with cash, dumped it into this number one portal class, and they still have rev share coming as well. So, you said it right. You said LSU's all in. That is a very appropriate way to say it.
What does it mean for Brian Kelly? Does it raise the pressure level on him going into his fourth year with the Tigers? Because so far, you can't look and say the results have been bad, terrible, no good, horrific, but it's definitely not where LSU's capable of being. And I don't think Brian Kelly's coaching for his job this year. I think he's coaching like many guys, such as Lincoln Riley at USC. I think he's coaching to stay off the hot seat going into 2026. And a 10-2 season and a playoff berth goes a long way towards calming that potential chatter that I think would arrive after this year if they miss the 12-team playoff again. So does this news, which I think is overall good for LSU and for Brian Kelly specifically, because you want to have more resources than not, you want to be committed. You don't want to be my beloved Seattle Mariners where you're like, we're kind of spending money, but we're not really going to spend it. Like, you don't want to have that sort of situation, but Does it make LSU's fan base look at Brian Kelly and say, okay, dude, you got everything you need. I know you lost the quarterback and all, but he wasn't going to start this year anyway. You got a veteran quarterback. You got this roster. You got to make the playoff.
Yeah, that's the baseline expectation this season. You have got to make the 12-team playoff. Because, Spencer, if they don't this year, it's very fair to look and say, okay, then when? Because after this season, you're going to lose Garrett Nussmeier. You just sunk all this money into this number one transfer portal class. All of those guys are going to be gone after 1 year. So you're going to have a massive turnover in 2026. I would say very similar to like what just happened with Florida State. What's going to happen this coming season to Ole Miss and to Ohio State. When you push all the chips to the middle of the table and you go all in on one roster, great. It shows tremendous commitment. And if you have the resources to do it, awesome. But there's also this very real question of how sustainable is success when you turn over literally half your roster in a year. That's what Florida State did. That's what Ohio State and Ole Miss are about to do. That's what LSU's probably going to do next year. So, yes, I mean, they are pot committed all in this year, and it is very fair to say, if not now, when. The one thing I'll tell you that's different with Brian Kelly and Lincoln Riley is Southern Cal is a wealthy enough program to where they could buy out Lincoln Riley's contract. LSU is not wealthy enough to buy out Brian Kelly's contract. I've told you this before on your show. For better or worse, LSU is financially, and Brian Kelly, they are financially bound to each other for a decade. So if this season goes poorly, he'll be back in 2026 because they have no recourse. They are bound to one another, and they got to make it work. And this is the year that everyone's pointing to say, you got everything you need, man. You got a loaded roster. You got a veteran quarterback. You got a look. It's never easy in the SEC, but you got a schedule that's manageable once you get past Clemson in the opener. Yeah, you better baseline. Look. This being an Oregon guy. Once you get in the playoff, there's no given because a lot of it is your draw. Oregon was the best team in college football last year. They were the only undefeated team. They got hosed. They got a bad draw. What does your draw look like? Are you hot in the playoff? Like, all that matters. Ohio State lost 2 games. They lost to a terrible Michigan team. They lost at Oregon. They got a favorable draw, and they won the national championship. So once you get in, there's a lot of variables you can't control. But for Brian Kelly and LSU in 2025, yes, basement expectation, 10-2 in the playoff.
And let's not forget that in 2026, they have revived our former president, Martin Van Buren, to be the quarterback of the future for the Tigers. For those who don't get that reference, I mistakenly in the past referred to Michael Van Buren, the former blue chip quarterback prospect, as Martin Van Buren. Yeah. I didn't catch it, and Moscona did. And I have not forgotten that since. And I can't think of Van Buren in any other way except, well, look at that. We once had a president whose name was Martin Van Buren. But I want to get you out of here on this, Moscona. I've been on a mission, and it's going pretty well so far, I would actually say, because of our wonderful hosts here at the Locked On Network. I'm on a mission to figure out who everybody's most impactful transfer is for 2025. And there could be a lot of options for for LSU because of how many guys they're bringing in and how talented and how high the expectations are and such. But I tell you, one guy from the portal that's got a pop for LSU to hit their ceiling this year. Who is it?
Braylon Moore, center from Virginia Tech. LSU's losing 4 starters on the offensive line that combined for 171 games played. This, like, LSU has answers everywhere. The single biggest gigantic question is all that experience you lost on the offensive line. Now they replaced it with a couple of transfers. They have recruited exceptionally well. Like, they've got blue chip guys there, but Spencer just guys haven't played. So you bring in Braylon Moore at center. He's expected to be the day one, snap one starter in the middle of that line, make all the calls, be the veteran anchor of that line. That's got to work. If it doesn't, DJ Chester, who was the starting center last year, he's a guard, but played center last year out of necessity, probably slides back in there, and he was your weakest link a year ago. So if you made, there's tons of them. They're all going to play, and they're all going to be impactful. But if you made me pick one, I would look at a guy they're counting on to be an impact player. And what is your biggest question mark position? That's on the offensive line.
I love that you went offensive line. Absolutely, positively love it. One of my good buddies in high school is an offensive lineman, and so he ingrained in me that mentality of, you know what, give the big fellas some love. We don't have stats, and people only notice us really when something bad happens. You missed a block, you committed a holding penalty, and whatnot. I think you're the first guy, Matt, to list an offensive lineman when being asked that question here on the show. At least so far. My quest shall continue. Matt Moscona, Locked On LSU, is on a quest to give you all the latest updates on the Tigers. He's on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Great. As always, Matt, speaking of LSU, that guy that they lost to Michigan, Bryce Underwood. Look, if I'm the Wolverines, I'm starting that guy. I wouldn't go in any other direction.
I don't even know who their other quarterbacks are. And if you're going to go dump $12 million in that dude's lap, you better play him because you only got him for 3 years.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, that's what I'm saying, and I'm talking about that next.
I'm super petty. I hope he stinks. I hope they never win a game, and I hope he transfers after a year and goes the path of like Dante Moore, or who's some of the other quarterback? Who's the guy that went to Florida and sued them? And then
Jaden Rashada. He is in the transfer portal, by the way.
Good. I hope that's what happened to Bryce
portal.
Underwood. I hope he goes in the transfer portal and goes Jaden Rashada. I hope he ends up at Kent State or something.
The shot at the Golden Flash is so unnecessary. The next segment, though, is necessary today for sure.